question everything. Today's topic is, well, it's still the Ukrainian war or Russian special military operation. The special emphasis on a podcast from the Duran that was held yesterday between Alex and Alexandra, and then Brian Berletic and Gonzalo Lira. And a little bit long, it's about 2.5 hours long. And while I was watching, it's like a typical say, questions arise, and one has to ask, what about this and what about that, and so forth. So the podcast actually starts off with Alexandra saying that according to the Business Insider, the Americans and Canadians are actually running out of 155 millimeter artillery rounds, and they're going to ramp up production, and that they are going to produce about 12,000 rounds a month. And then Alexandra makes the statement that, well, that's about 2 days worth of rounds being used by the Ukrainian military. So whether this was an error or not, so he questions it. Then unfortunately, I then have to question his assessment. And the general consensus or the general narrative on the internet is that the Ukrainians are firing about 6,000 rounds per day. And I have to ask myself, but 6,000 rounds is a hell of a lot of rounds. So how many 155 millimeter artillery pieces do the Ukraine still have left? That's question number one. Secondly, if you look at the reports and so on, when there is shelling of the Ukrainian forces on the Russian side, then it's usually a couple of rounds, maybe 20 max, or that's what they reported. And if you that's not a lot, and if you think about that, the Russians have counter-battery equipment, and they can determine the positions of the Ukrainian artillery. And Russians are supposed to have artillery that fires a longer distance. Whether that's true, I'm not totally sure. I'm not a military expert or neither a weapon expert. Then you cannot fire 100 rounds from any position. You have to fire, say, maybe, and if you're optimized, that means you fire 5 shots or 7 shots per minute, that type of firing rate. And then you have to move your artillery, because you're either going to be counter-attacked or there's going to be some other problem. And then you have to set up your whole system again and get your targeting right, and then fire another 20 artillery shells, and then move away and find another place, and so forth and so forth. I cannot see how you're going to fire 6,000 rounds in a day. So maybe that's a combined amount, which includes the 105 millimeters, which includes mortars. I'm not sure, but I think there's 122 millimeter artillery piece, but I'm not totally sure about that one. So I cannot agree with this amount of 6,000 shells per day. And I also cannot support the idea of that's not going to be enough manufactured by the Canadians and the Russians, the Americans. But it brings me to another point, and that is actually the capability of the West to manufacture arms and ammunitions and then provide it to Ukraine. And there's a general narrative that they don't have the capability. And I partially agree and I partially disagree. And the reason why I disagree with this matter is that, yes, they don't have the manufacturing capacity now, but they can easily increase the capacity and build the necessary additional equipment and building and whatever you want to call it. Not too difficult to do that. But the point here is that they haven't committed themselves to increase production. It's not a warlike stand at this stage. They haven't committed the funds to do that. And then no private contractor will expand his facility for production, for possible production. And even if he wants to expand his production capability, he wants to have a long term in order to recover his capex. So assuming that the West cannot manufacture weapons in time is a fallacy. If this conflict expands to a real NATO war, then it's a totally different ballgame. And then we're going to see a huge expansion of military manufacturing capability. But then there are funds committed, time is a factor, and, equipment is always there. It's not unique equipment that has to be manufactured and it's going to take 6 months to manufacture. No, it's standard type of equipment that you use. And even if you have to, then you've pirate other facilities that do similar work and convert civil infrastructure to military production capability. So this is a very unwise statement. It's a question of commitment of funds and commitment by the Americans to really commit the funds to expand. It's the same thing that the Germans did when they went to Qatar to make the gas deal. And then Qatar said, but listen, then we want a 20-year commitment. And then the Germans said no. And then Qatar said, but then we're not going to expand our facilities. So you're not going to get more gas. As simple as that. Okay, this is one of the topics that they discussed at the very beginning. And then later on, I see Brian Berletic actually is the military specialist. He apparently was a Marine. And so I'm not going to contest his knowledge. But a lot of things that were actually mentioned, I mentioned in my previous videos as well. So it's not that we totally disagree. So what I would like to add, I don't want to subtract, I would like to add to his comments and to Gonzalo and Alexandra, who were the guys that spoke the most. And this is about the force strength and the capability of the Ukrainians to lose manpower. And whether there is an infinite supply of soldiers. And I can tell you straightforward, there is no infinite supply. According to world stats or something like that, Ukraine had a population of 43.5 million last year. It has decreased by about 400,000 this year. But one has to look at 43, so let's take a round number, 43 million people. That's the population of Ukraine. Now, firstly, you have to subtract the Donbass. And the Donbass is supposed to represent about 20% of Ukraine. So 20% is about 8 million people. But it is also the heartland of industry and mining and so forth and so forth. So I will estimate maybe 25%. That's a quarter. So that's 10 million people that live in the Donbass. So the western part, that means Zelensky's section, has about 30 million people. Now, we can debate and go in statistics, but we have to do back of the envelope calculation. So there's a lot of assumption. But in any case, let's say we have a ratio of 50-50, male to female. So of those 30 million people, there are only 15 million people male. And then one has to look at the age gap. And you will have a certain percentage of people that are below 18, which are not suitable for fighting. And then you have people that are about 60, are not. So you have about a span of 40 years, and the other ones are also, if you want to calculate 60 to 80 and 0 to 18, say also 40 years. So, let's do it a number and say half of that. So now you have 7.5 million people, men, that are of military age. So you only have 7.5 million people, men. And now you have to look at medical conditions. How many of these soldiers can really go and be a soldier and take the hardness and the suffering that goes with any battle, and the endurance and the physical capability? And as you can see, I'm not the youngest person anymore, and I can tell you straightforward that I cannot do what an 18-year can do. And most of our age people, if you work hard, you probably have back problems and knee problems. So, of the 7.5 million males capable, I will deduct, say, another 2 million people, which brings me now to 5.5 that are on fighting capability. Now, I have spoken about this in a previous meeting, video about support. You have an army consists, say, of 1 million soldiers, and we can debate about that because certain sectors will have a different ratio. I mean, aviation will have a huge support structure to the fighting personnel, and infantry will have a 50-50 between fighting and support, and tanks will also be like skewed into the region of, and artillery will be into the region of the support structure, but let's call it a 50-50 back envelope calculations. So of this 5.5 million people, you're going to have 50% in support. Now that brings you to 2.75 million fighting in military person. You don't have an aviation, so that is gone. You have artillery and you have tanks, and then you have normal infantry. And so you have 2.7 million people for that available. Now, after school, I first went to the university and studied. And after I completed my study, I went to 2 years military service. My friends at school, some of them actually went directly after school to do military service. So they were about 19 years old. When I went to army, I was about 24, 25 years old. So that means I'm a little bit older than the other guys. And what I've noticed during my military training is that the young guys, they were pushing it. They were physically more fit with us. They did a hell of a lot more push-ups and pull-ups and whatever you want to call it. They were eager. They were reckless sometimes. And we older, I was not the only older people. A lot of guys that were with me were also graduated person, because in the intelligence service in South Africa, you had to have at least grade 12. Remember, I said 12 years schooling in South Africa. So that was a prerequisite. So everybody was well educated, or at least of a fairly high intelligence of average. I will come to that just now to that. In any case, and what you could see is that the older guys, they were more calculated. They were not reckless. They were not volunteering. We all hold back and paced ourselves. So there's a huge difference between 18 years and a little bit older, who's become savvy. Now, when I was in school and so on, like in grade 11, I did life-saving course, like at the ocean. You sit there on your stool and you, if there's any problems, you go and save the people from the villains. And I actually went to Sea and Sand, which is a well-known organization in South Africa. And the leader of the Sea and Sand was the real Rambo, Sparks Esthuizen, said to us, give me a company of 18 years and I will conquer the world. And the reason why is that 18 years guys don't think what they are. They're not thinking about consequences. I can also tell you about my other friends that went directly to the army and they came back on R&R, whatever you want to call it. Firstly, they were totally psyched up. You can see the propaganda was working hard. And in South Africa, we had a bush war. And in the bush war, we had a maneuver called, in Afrikaans, vuur en beweging. A direct translation would be fire and movement. And it would be like, you say you have a line of 10 guys. The first guy will be Alpha, the second guy will be Bravo, the third guy will be Alpha, and so it goes down the line. And then, and if you are in a fire, then you are supposed to divide yourself up in this Alpha Bravo group, and then your commander will shout Alpha, and then the Alpha guys will jump up, run 3 meters in front, while the Bravo guys are shooting and giving covering fire. And then the Alpha guys will fall down and start shooting, and the guy will call Bravo, and all the Bravo guys will stand up and charge 3 meters, and then they fall down. So it goes up and up and up and up and up. And that's supposed to happen while the bullets are flying. And then I asked my friend when he came back, and at that stage he was just barely 19. He said he was in a contact where they had to exercise this procedure or tactic. And I asked him, how do you stand up? The bullets are flying. How do you go under fire and you stand up and you charge 3 meters and you fall down? And he said to me, you don't think, you just do. That is the mentality of an 18-year guy. But trust me, I was not in a similar situation. But when we had some urban operation that we had to do, because of the unrest in South Africa and so on, I did a camp, not a camp, but we were positioned in a certain town. And then one of the guys actually got, one of the support people, which was a black at that stage, or colored, I can't remember. He was drunk, and he took a rifle, fully loaded rifle, and he was running away. All the other guys were excited, they're going to chase him. And my sergeant and the young guys were grabbing their rifles and so on. And I was also grabbing my rifle. And then I said to myself, whoa, what the hell am I doing? This is not my work. Whoa, I can be shot. You see the age thing that comes in? In any case, so my sergeant told me later on, he was chasing the guy and then suddenly comes into a clearing, and as he comes into the clearing, the gun is right in front of his head. And he got a big fright. The guy's finger was on the trigger. Now, this guy was a little bit psyched up because he was drunk or on a drugs or whatever. Then the sergeant only started to realize about his life stage. The sergeant was a young guy. So the point I'm trying to really make, and why I'm telling the story, is that there's a difference between soldiers. Now, of this 2.7 million soldiers, not all of them are going to be brave. Only the young guys will advance and accept the flying of a wall, walk into a wall of bullets. The older guys will be careful. They won't be reacting as they should be reacting. So, one has to look at the military situation as well. It's not an easy thing. And it's a complicated thing. And the more guys the Ukrainians lose, the lower the morale will be, and the less the guys will stand up and advance to the front and be shot. The more they will think and get into their foxholes or so on and so forth and so on. So there is no unlimited manpower. Forget about that. Now, I also understand that in the Kharkiv offensive, they used a lot of foreign fighters, mercenaries. Again, if the Ukrainian armor sacrifices the mercenaries, they're not going to come. Nobody's going to support you. And by the way, they also talked about the mercenaries and so on. But, you know, a mercenary is a fighter for the money. He thinks he's Rambo and can be a cycle, because killing other people for money is nothing more, in my opinion, than a cycle. So, but he wants the money. And if he's going to die, then why is he fighting? So, mistreating mercenaries is a no-no. Then you're going to lose all their guys, and they might turn on you or whatever, or they disappear, and that's the end of the day. And a lot of soldiers actually were killed now in the Kharkiv, which is coming out not in the Russian media, but in the Western media. So it wasn't expensive in terms of lives and equipment. So that's also not a good thing that they did. And then I would like to talk, because something else is actually bothering me now. If I look at the right side or alternative media, and especially these types of videos and so on, in the last couple of weeks and so on, they always talk about and refer back to the Second World War. And I would just like to state, the Second World War is not the Ukrainian special military operation. Technology has changed, and therefore tactics have to change. You cannot do the same thing that you did previously in another war. You can use it maybe as a guideline of what not to do, but not what you should do. Okay. So in any case, I always say about the ratio between the Russians and the Germans, and they refer to certain historical books and so on. And it was actually the Russians were not that in superior numbers. And then they were saying, why did the Russians win? And the Germans were not as good. Like I said in a previous video, I am a German. So it buggers me a little bit when they tell me this type of nonsense. But unfortunately, I'm a non-believer of history. I don't believe any history. And I actually mentioned in a previous video of this poet or writer of Africa that says that when a lion gets his own historian, then what's it say? The hunt will be properly described or recorded or something like that. The precise words I can't get at this point, but you can watch one of my previous videos and there's a link to it. And that is true. History is written by the victors. And why I also don't believe in history is because there are so many contradictory type of books that are written. And who the hell knows really what is right and what is wrong? And because it's a biased view. You get a lot of facts, and you interpret the facts according to your own view, and then you write what has happened. And then another guy will take the same facts and in his own biased view write history as he saw it. And that's why you have different versions of history. And there's a special event. Also, there's a special event that occurred. I'm not going to mention that. But it has been classified as being illegal to investigate. And if you do research and investigate it, you can get jail term. Now, if that doesn't put a hell of a lot of doubt in your mind, then I don't know. But that's doubt. That is a question what one has to ask. In any case, so what I'm actually now forced to do is I'm going to force the numbers that I have available and which I have read before. And this is about the amount of people that actually died in the second. Now, I can't remember all the others, but what I do remember is that the Germans lost about 20 million people. And of those 20 million people, 5 million people were soldiers. Only 5. That means 15 million Germans were killed with civilians. A hell of a lot of numbers. And if you look at the Americans who were killed in both wars, that means in Japan, South, Eastern, and the West, it's only 450,000 soldiers that they lost. Not even 500,000. But then comes the other one, and that is the Russian losses. In the same article, they say that the Russians have lost 20 million people that were killed. Now, now you must think about how many soldiers. Why did Russia lose 20 million people? So you cannot tell me that the ratio of the Russian soldiers to the German soldiers were more or less 1-on-1 or 1 to 1.2. That's not happening. If you want to do that, then you have to question history per se. Do you understand that? You cannot punch factors. You cannot make such a big. If I want to say the Germans lost 5 million soldiers, that's on all the fronts, over the whole theater. West, East, Africa, wherever you want to call them. Now, so, I'm sorry, 20 million Russians died. They couldn't be all civilians because the Germans didn't go and destroy all towns and all villages and stuff like that. No, that's impossible. And that would be a lie to assume that. And so it must be a lot more soldiers, right? So then if there are a lot more soldiers that were killed, then they were not on a 1-to-1 ratio with the Germans. So unfortunately, I have to disagree with that assessment. And also, I talked in a different video about the Second World War and why the Germans lost them. Why it says that the Russians basically were the main force that destroyed the Germans and so on. Yes, I can agree to that, partially. But a lot of mistakes were made on the Eastern Front by the German generals, not in the tactic and strategic itself, but in the strategic decisions that they took. Instead of going left, they went right. Now, everybody makes mistakes, and if you lose it, then you lose it. But it wasn't that the Russians were superior. It was that the Germans made the wrong decision. And then there's another factor, and that is the winter. In those things, it was one of the coldest winter. I think it went down to -50, which is seldom that it happens. So that's a big factor. And then thirdly, and that is what nobody really actually says, and that the Russians moved all the armament manufacturing to the east. And at the end of the day, they out-manufactured the Germans. As far as I can remember, the Russians were pushing out 300 tanks each month. 300 tanks each month. So it doesn't matter whether the German tank was superior or not. You overran the position and that's it. Okay, the Russian tanks did have an advantage. They had a lot wider tracks, so they could go into muddy fields, and so they were much better in the winter. So, but that's not the point. These are all small details, and you can argue left and you can argue right, but that's the point. So one has to be careful if you want to make statements like that. Now, I only argued on what I know and what people have written. You find other sources that have different numbers. But who says that number is right and who says my number is right? The point here is just the argument. You have to see what's going on. So I wish that these commentators will stop making any references to the Second World War. Not the same. Then I would also like to talk about the escalation of the SMO. One has to look again at what the Russians are doing, what they have done. They are incredibly patient. And they systematically go from one step to another and escalate and escalate and escalate and escalate a little bit. There is no reason for the Russians to escalate this operation. None. Because the West is destroying himself by economic means. The Ukraine is destroying itself by the offenses that they do and the manpower that they lose. and still fighting a war that they can never win. So why would Russia commit himself to more forces, more death, more carnage, more innocent civilians being killed, more infrastructure being destroyed? Why? You're doing it yourself. Why should I start hitting you if you are hitting yourself? That's illogical. But there are red lines that the Russians will trigger. And they've been warning it for a long time. Just as they've been warning about this military operation and their stance on mutual defense. And the West didn't want to listen. And the point here is that they will, if those red lines are crossed, the Russians will react. Make no mistake about it. And if I see what they will do and when they will react, is that firstly, if the Ukrainians are actually starting to bomb Russian territory to a serious phase. A couple of military attacks on civilian structures in the west of Russia, Belgrade, and so on. Those are still being patiently absorbed. But some other stage, that's it. They're going to call it. And then they will go into those areas and they will annihilate those things. Those guys that were actually doing the bombing. It's the same if you go at if the Ukrainians do certain things, they don't stop at that Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and so on. The Russians will say, that's it. And they will annihilate those guys. They will find them and they will annihilate. So the Russians have been fair warning. The same with the Americans. The Americans now think, but they've been poking the bear and the bear doesn't want to wake up. So let's poke him a little bit more and a little bit harder and so forth until the bear wakes up. That's the red line. And then there will be war on a much bigger scale. But again, why escalate it if it's not necessary? Because the consequences of escalating it increase the risk of unintended consequences. And that's where the Third World War will start. The unintended consequences by escalation. So all the people are actually shouting and Russia must move on and increase it. Why? The Ukrainians are doing it themselves. The Ukrainian economy is gone. They don't have the money. I know that Gonzalo says, but they haven't had a price increase and everything is still manageable and still have all the food and so on. Yeah, so until when? The Ukrainians are printing money because they can't pay their bills. So naturally that's going to go into inflation. Maybe the price not increasing because they are getting all the free dollars from from America, which is also all right. So the problems are still there, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And I just my last topic I wanted to say about this whole conversation is the counter-offense of the offense actually in the Kharkiv region and the purpose and why the Russians actually retreated. Now, like I said, I'm not a military specialist. I am not a strategic. For that, you can follow Brian. He's well known about that, and seems to me he's knows what he's talking about. But if I stand back and look at the reason for the Russian SMO, it was to restore the boundaries of the Lugansk and the Donetsk Oblast, which are now republics, and then protect Crimea and the water supply, and that was why Kherson was taken and so on, and I can understand that. And then I looked at the reason why Kharkiv was actually attacked and occupied by the Russians, and I can see two reasons for that. First goal is to have a buffer to the Lugansk Republic now. And also to prevent the Ukrainians from really accessing the Russian border and attack the Russian Towns on the border, which have been doing for a while now, and I think that's aggravating Russia. And if there's a reaction which is beyond the SMO, then it will be in the Kharkiv region to stop this ridiculous attack on civilian structures by the Ukrainians. It's like really poking the bear or the hornet's nest. Stop doing it. It's stupid. Anyway, so if you look at Lyceum and so on, yeah, some people say it's of incredible strategic value. Why? Because there's railway crossings and roads crossings. Yeah, okay, so if I don't want to use those road crossings and I don't want to use those roads, then it's not a strategic object for me. So one has to really ask oneself is what is of strategic value to the Russian command? And apparently that area wasn't that important. So most of this stuff is speculations, as I myself was speculating. But I'm just asking the questions on why. At the end of the day, there are 5 important questions which has become part of our repertoire. And these are usually why, when, how, where, why, or something like that. Sorry, I missed the one. But in any case, other 5. And you always have to ask those questions because at the end of the day, it gives you a proper route of identifying the real problem, the real decision, or the real goal. And some of the stuff I've been hearing now for a while from various commentators doesn't always make sense, and I have to question it. So I came to the end of my discussion. Thanks for listening. If you like the video, subscribe or press the like button. At the Rumble, it's pressing the Rumble button or something like that. It's also a like button. And until next time, see you.